Hello, Professor Rogers. Thanks for joining our program Eye on the Biz. Could I ask you by starting telling us a bit, what do you teach at the University of Wisconsin Medicine?
Hi, well, it's a pleasure being here. I'm in the Journalism and Mass Communication School in Wisconsin, and I teach classes in international communication, political communication, new media, and journalism.
And what brings you here to Bangkok, Thailand?
Well, I've spent the last semester in Singapore. I was on sabbatical in Wisconsin, and I came to Singapore, and I was a visiting professor at NTU in Singapore. And I had some Thai former students who invited me to come to Thailand, and I've spent some days in Chiang Mai, gave some talks there at the University of Chiang Mai, and now I'm here giving some talks at Burapa University.
You give a presentation today at the Thai Journalists Association, with also in this lecture also in collaboration with the Burapa University. And your topic is media and political polarization. Could you tell us a bit trying to recap your presentation earlier? What have you said? Yeah, your presentation.
Absolutely. Well, new communication technologies have changed dramatically the way we live our lives, from the way we work, the way we go to work, the way we consume information, the way we relate to other people. And of course, it's not surprising then that it also changes the way in which we interact with media. It used to be that media consumers would probably have a newspaper that they were subscribed to, or they would watch their favorite television station, and that's the way that they would relate with news. But that tends to be no longer the case. Nowadays, in the new media environment, a lot of the distribution of news happens through our social networks. So we start being exposed to news because our friends send us links to different information, a different point of view, different outlets. And so this begs the question of whether, because we might start self-selecting, that is, only talking to people that think like us, is it possible then that media in this new environment tend to make us more polarized as a society? That is, do they sort of separate us? If I'm only talking to people that think like me, and other people are only talking to people that think like them, it could be that the distance between us and them actually grows. So we started studying whether media and new media in particular would actually result in people being more polarized about issues. We've conducted now a series of studies on this, looking at actual polarization. So are people more polarized because they consume media? And the answer is, in most countries, that's not the case. It's not that media consumption makes us more polarized. However, and this is the other side of the coin, however, we do find that media consumption makes us think the world is a more polarized place to live in, particularly people who receive news from the internet. So people who receive news from the internet are much more likely to think that their country is a more polarized country. And this is systematically. We've already done this study in 10 countries. And in 9 out of the 10 countries, people who look at news online think that their country is more polarized.
And in your presentation, you also mentioned about that in the near future, probably people will access the internet through the mobile phone more. Are you saying that is it possible that mobile phone will become more important to run PC or other mobile devices?
I think you're absolutely right in terms of, mobile devices are the future of our connectivity. As of today, one would say it's the mobile phone, because that's sort of the emerging leader in internet access and interactivity among people. But some people say, does it have to be the cell phone? Maybe not. Maybe it's not. So there's now people who are producing clothes that have interactivity capacity. So there's a Levi's jacket that lets you interact with music. Google soon will be having their Google glasses that will let us interact with information. Some people talk about watches, wristwatches that could also have internet capabilities. And there's all kinds of objects in the house that could also be connected among themselves and also connected to computers and to mobile phones. So potentially the mobile phone will be the most important of those tools, but I emphasize it's the mobility that matters. So it's information, access to information and connectivity that we carry everywhere we go And it might be even in our clothes, not necessarily in a phone.
Yeah, and the devices you mentioned, the clothes, the watch, the glasses, would that also allow you to access information? I mean, news story.
Absolutely. So you can use your cell phone to read the news. You can use your iPad to read the news, but you can also read the news. According to what we've heard so far of Google Glasses, you can also read the news directly on your screen. And so
On the glass?
On the glass, exactly. Or you could
still have to imagine, yeah?
Absolutely. or as in an MIT prototype called the Sixth Sense, you would actually project onto any surface, including your hand, if need be.
I don't know whether that will be good thing or bad thing to happen to our society in the world.
Well, that's a good question. I mean, like most things, it'll have some good things and it'll have some bad things.
In your presentation, you have a term that really strike me. You say that this will be a decade of augmented reality. Could you explain to us what you mean by that term?
Yes. Well, people who look at technology and how technology changes are starting to talk about these 10-year cycles. And so we went from mainframes to personal computers, from personal computers to mobile phones. And so, well, what would characterize the decade that we are in? And I think that this is a label that was not created by me. Some people talk about this idea of augmented reality. It's basically living your everyday life that becomes enhanced by the access you have to information, real-time information. You're making a purchase and you're able to access information about the product that you're purchasing. Or you're talking to someone and you're able to see, I'm talking right here to you and I might be able to see your information on Facebook and I might be able to read what you've posted about certain topics. And so I have information and connections that are accessible to me all the time. And that's what people refer to augmented reality, because it's not like the old metaphor of the internet where it was a place that you went to, right? And you went to the cyber world and people had an identity in the cyber world. That's no longer the case. It's about your everyday life. It's about taking the transportation and being connected to people and being connected to information.
By that, it seems that people will kind of be able to access information all the time, in every single second of daily life. And is there any study or maybe your comment on whether that is good or bad to a human being?
Well, that's an important question, because some people start to worry about what they call information overload. So yes, I can have hundreds and hundreds of bits of information, but can I process them? Can I really make sense of them? And so I say it depends on two things. So information by itself is not enough, because I need to be able to make sense of information. And so I think that there's a very important role for media and journalists and editors of information, which is making sense for people of all the information that is out there. Now, having said that, that making sense process might be somewhat automatized, as it happens today. So for example, I'm searching for a hotel, and I do it online, and I get different prices, and I can compare. But I also get the reviewers of people who have stayed in that hotel, and they tell me, and they review the hotel for me. So in a way, we already have that information available. Now, these technologies will make it easier for us to access that information at all times. Whether that's good or bad, I think it's an open question. Some people suggest that people who are immersed in these technologies are becoming quicker at making decisions. So if you studies that look at the MRIs of the brain and brain patterns, so children that play a lot of video games start to become quicker at a response, being able to produce responses. Now, if we think quick is good, the answer is then this is good. But is quick good? Not necessarily. And so it's something that we have to think about very carefully.
Yeah, I would wonder whether if I go to buy my toilet paper, I will need somebody to make a decision for me, right? Like what you show in your presentation. I also wonder, with all this changing of media environment, how do journalists will fit in, the professional journalists fit in?
Yeah, I mean, this is kind of what, like they say in the United States, that's the $1,000,000 question, right? And so as a profession, we're struggling with that question. Now, what I think is there's never been more need for journalism and for journalistic activity. But right now, we're in a moment of flux, like how do we fund journalism is becoming an open question, right? And so many countries had a private advertisement market that funded journalistic efforts, right? So newspaper would sell their advertisement, and then with that profit, the advertisement would subsidize the news collection effort. In many countries, that is disappearing precisely because of the online domain. Advertising is shifting online, and it shifts to certain specific players that are not necessarily journalists. So who gets the lion's share of advertisement in the online world? Well, it's Google, it's Facebook. It's not the traditional journalist organizations. Part of the problem is that they jumped into this game a little late, but let's keep that aside. Now, so right now we're in a moment of so how do we fund a journalism in an era in which we need it, I think, more than ever, because the more information you have, the more information you need to make sense of, and that's what journalists do. They help us make sense of information. But it's not clear how we're going to fund it. Some people are experimenting with citizen journalism, trying to get citizens to collaborate in the process of making journalism. Other people are experimenting with NGOs and foundations providing the funds for in-depth reporting, in-depth stories to be conducted. So I don't think somebody has the answer yet in terms of this is the new model that's going to replace the old model. But many people are working on developing what's the new business model of journalism.
Maybe a short follow-up question here. And do you teach your journalism student differently now than, let's say, 10 years ago?
I think the answer is yes, in the sense of, on the one hand, well, yes, we teach them new platforms that we didn't teach years back, and so what we teach has actually changed. We are aware that before there was strict professionalization, so I could be a journalist and write for a newspaper, and that was all that I did. Now, most media businesses want more flexibility, so they want a reporter that's able to write the story for the print outlet, but also shoot the story for the television or the webcast, or have an audio version for the radio. So with consolidation of media ownership and convergence of media, the industry wants a journalism that has more skills. We try to balance that with, on the one hand, you learn these skills, but these platforms change also very quickly. So right now, I have my students have Twitter and do Twitter feeds, et cetera, but 5 years from now, that might not longer exist, right? And so this brings us back to, yes, we teach them the platforms, and we teach them how to work in different platforms. Probably the most important thing continues to be how to be a good journalist and how to make sense of information. Probably the only change that I think is that has changed dramatically is that nowadays we're trying to instill in journalists numeracy. That is, they need to be able to understand data and to understand big amounts of data, which in the past we didn't emphasize as much. In the past it was more about sources and writing your story. Increasingly we think a journalist has to understand scientific studies and be able to learn from them, and has to be able to understand what is a public opinion poll, and was this public opinion poll well conducted, and has to be able to understand in an online social movement, how do I detect who is the leader in this movement? And so those are new skills that they need to encounter.
It looks like a journalist have to become more versatile and in different skill. Professor Rojas will stay with us for the next break of BChat.